In less than a minute, the carefully manufactured illusion of absolute royal authority was shattered by the simple, unforgiving beep of a plastic security scanner glowing red. It did not happen during a screaming match in the private dining rooms, nor was it announced through a sensational palace press release. It happened with a quiet, devastatingly polite redirection by a heavily armed royal protection officer standing at the grand ceremonial gates of Buckingham Palace. What Camilla realized behind closed doors, as her own family members were escorted away from the VIP entrances and pointed toward a side door designated for caterers and junior staff, was that her creeping takeover had been utterly paralyzed. This is the story of a secret, meticulously orchestrated spatial power grab, a flawlessly executed institutional retaliation by Princess Anne, and the staggering realization that wearing the king's crown does not grant you the keys to his castle. This video will unpack the deeply psychological warfare hidden within the architecture of the British monarchy and the staggering commercial desperation driving Camilla's every move. We will look at how she attempted to secure an untouchable high-tier physical presence for her non-royal children within the palace network, how Princess Anne forensically tracked the administrative paper trail and the silent, ruthless security downgrade that followed. What looked like a routine update to palace protection protocols was actually the total dismantling of a shadow court. That detail matters, because in the aristocratic world, physical access is not just about convenience. It is the ultimate currency, and losing it is the ultimate visual humiliation. To comprehend the sheer brutality of this institutional checkmate, you must first understand the towering illusion of power Camilla had constructed over 3 agonizing decades. For 30 years, she endured the most intense public vilification in modern history, playing a masterful slow-burn game of psychological public relations. And standing on the balcony of Buckingham Palace on Coronation Day, she truly believed she had won the final victory. She had the crown, she had the king, but most significantly, she had her own family front and center, with her grandchildren holding her robes, entirely bypassing the traditional roles usually reserved for blood royalty. In her mind, the towering, unmanageable legacy of Diana, Princess of Wales, had been successfully paved over. She believed she had Charles completely isolated and managed to convince that her proximity to the monarch made her the definitive, unchallenged matriarch of the institution. She felt entirely untouchable. But during this post-coronation high, a quiet but incredibly ambitious shift began within the administrative offices of Clarence House. Camilla understood a fundamental, terrifying truth about her position, while she'd captured the apex of social triumph. Her bloodline held absolutely zero constitutional weight, unlike the Spencer family, who possessed centuries of their own independent aristocratic infrastructure, immense private wealth, and sprawling ancestral estates. Camilla's family relies almost entirely on her proximity to the throne for their elevated status. This lack of inherent institutional gravity created a staggering commercial desperation. She needed to permanently embed her non-royal children, Tom and Laura, into the very concrete of the royal establishment before the inevitable end of Charles's reign. Her strategy was a creeping physical occupation of royal spaces. In the monarchy, power is visually demonstrated by who gets to walk through which door. It is about who can bypass security, who can park in the inner quadrangle, and who is allowed to wander the private corridors without an escort. What appears to be true based on sudden shifts in gate access and VIP clearance logs early in the new reign is that Camilla quietly ordered the highest tier of unrestricted all-access security passes to be issued to her immediate family. She was elevating them from the status of private guests to the operational equivalent of senior working royals. She was building a shadow court, assuming that the king's blind devotion would shield this staggering overreach from any internal scrutiny. But she fatally underestimated the hardest working, most quietly terrifying figure within the House of Windsor. Princess Anne does not operate on emotion. She does not care about public relations media spin or the psychological coddling of her brother's wife. Anne operates purely on duty, constitutional precedent, and a fierce, unyielding protection of the crown. As the Princess Royal and holding senior military and protective roles such as a gold stick in waiting, Anne is deeply integrated into the security and operational machinery of the monarchy. She is the silent guardian of the gates. Anne did not have to actively spy on Camilla. The administrative footprint simply crossed her desk. During routine high-level security reviews, Anne and her fiercely loyal protection commanders analysed the master clearance list for the royal estates. They were looking for vulnerabilities, they were looking for protocol deviations, and they found them. The paper trail exposed the newly minted unrestricted VIP passes granted to non-working, non-royal individuals. It laid bare the sheer audacity of Camilla's attempt to seamlessly merge her private family with the sovereign bloodline in the eyes of the palace guard. This is where the story pivots from a quiet power grab into a masterclass of institutional warfare. A different royal might have taken those clearance logs straight to King Charles, sparking a massive emotional family war that would have inevitably leaked to the tabloids. But Anne possesses a deeply ingrained understanding of the palace machine. She knew that confronting Charles would only trigger his defensive rage and victimize Camilla. So Anne chose a path far more devastating. She chose a silent administrative execution. The retaliation was carried out without a single raised voice. Utilizing her senior authority over royal protection and protocol, Anne simply initiated a sweeping immediate standardization of security access across all royal residences. She mandated that moving forward, unrestricted Tier 1 access would be strictly legally defined by bloodline and active official working status for the Crown. It was framed as a necessary modernization of security in a dangerous world, a completely standard alignment with government protection policies. By enforcing the absolute letter of the law, Anne quietly instantly invalidated the VIP passes Camilla had just secured for her family. The system was updated overnight, no warnings were issued, no dramatic meetings were held. The codes were simply rewritten, and the backdoor access was permanently sealed. When the trap finally snapped shut, it was a moment of profound public visual humiliation. Camilla's family members arrived at the imposing front gates of a royal residence, expecting the grand saluting reception they had quickly grown accustomed to. They swiped their newly issued passes. The light blinked red. The heavy iron gates remained locked. The deeply apologetic, perfectly polite royal protection officers stepped forward. They did not insult them. They simply explained with the immovable cold courtesy of the British state that there had been a routine update to the security matrix. They informed Camilla's family that their current clearance level required them to proceed down the street, away from the cameras and the grandeur, and enter through the designated side door used by vendors, contractors, and junior staff. When the furious phone call reached Camilla's private quarters, the realization must have been suffocating. The entire maneuver was wrapped in the impenetrable language of security optimization and institutional safety. There was no personal attack for her to defend against. Anne had merely enforced the ancient, unyielding rules of the institution, and in doing so, had completely humiliated Camilla's shadow court. Camilla was completely trapped. She could not publicly complain about her family being forced to use a side door without exposing her own staggering entitlement and her secret attempt to bypass royal protocol. She could not scream to the press that she was being bullied because the actions taken by the Protection Command were legally flawless. The illusion of her absolute power shattered against the cold, hard reality of a locked gate. In a state of sudden panic, realizing her private empire had just been publicly downgraded by her sister-in-law, she had only one desperate option left. She had to go to the king. When Camilla entered the king's private study, breathless and armed with the indignity of her family being treated like palace contractors, she fully expected a royal explosion. She expected Charles to immediately summon Princess Anne, demand an apology, and personally override the security matrix. For decades, Charles's overwhelming guilt over the public suffering Camilla endured had made him her fiercest, most irrational defender. Whenever she felt slighted, he would tear up the rulebook. But as he looked at the newly standardized security protocols issued by his sister's office, the king did not reach for the telephone. He looked at the paperwork, he looked at his frantic wife, and he offered a devastating, impenetrable silence. This was the psychological climax of her creeping palace takeover. Charles, the man she had managed for 30 years, refused to save her shadow court. And the reason why exposes the brutal reality of the British monarchy? Charles is no longer a rebellious Prince of Wales fighting for his mistress. He is an aging king, deeply aware of his own mortality and heavily reliant on the operational brilliance of his sister to keep the institution secure. More importantly, he understood exactly what Anne had done. By framing the downgrade as a strict adherence to government security mandates, Anne had made it impossible for Charles to intervene. If the king ordered the palace guards to bypass counter-terrorism protocols just so his wife's civilian children could park in the VIP quadrangle, it would trigger a catastrophic internal crisis. Faced with the choice between indulging his wife's spatial entitlement and maintaining the security integrity of the crown, Charles chose the crown. For Camilla, that silence was a suffocating realization. It was the moment the velvet curtain was ripped away, exposing the staggering vulnerability of her physical position within the royal ecosystem. You have to understand the depth of this spatial and commercial desperation. Camilla is the queen consort, but she is essentially a glittering guest in a fortress she does not own. She does not own the gates, she does not command the guards, and now she realized she could not even guarantee her own bloodline front door access to the building she lives in. If she outlives Charles, her reality becomes incredibly precarious. She possesses no independent aristocratic infrastructure to rival the royal estates. She will be a queen dowager, reliant entirely on the goodwill of a new monarch King William and the strict protocol enforcement of Princess Anne. The illusion of her absolute power evaporated the moment she realized she was wearing borrowed diamonds in a borrowed castle, heavily guarded by officers who answer to a sister-in-law who silently despises her ambition. This spatial exile was only the first phase of the institutional reckoning. With Camilla's shadow court permanently downgraded, the visual hierarchy of the monarchy was brutally silently restored. If the locked gate was the physical blow, what happened at the next major state function was the ultimate visual humiliation. As the diplomatic reception began, eagle-eyed observers noticed a stark contrast in spatial choreography. Camilla's family members, stripped of their VIP clearance, were forced to arrive early, quietly slipping through the side entrances and filtering into the background of the grand rooms largely unnoticed by the press cameras. They were visually reduced to exactly what the Constitution says they are: private citizens. Meanwhile, Catherine arrived with the effortless, devastating gravity of a true future queen. She did not need a special pass. She entered through the sovereign's entrance, flanked by the king's guards, the doors sweeping open without a single beep of a plastic scanner. She wore the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara, a piece radiating the untouchable legacy of Diana, stepping directly into the spotlight that Camilla had tried so desperately to control. This was not a coincidence, it was a spatial restoration. Princess Anne and Prince William were silently restoring the boundaries Camilla had spent 3 decades trying to blur. By utilizing the cold machinery of palace administration, they were boxing her into a purely ceremonial corner. They allowed her to keep the title and the balcony waves because stripping her of those would publicly damage the king. But beneath the surface, they had entirely locked her out of the operational power grid. This is the ultimate contrast of Schadenfreude. To the casual observer, watching a royal carriage roll down the mall, Camilla appears to have conquered the highest peak of British society. She is the queen. But behind the heavy iron gates of Buckingham Palace, she is a woman acutely aware that her power is entirely fictional. She is surrounded by corridors she does not control, guarded by men she cannot command, and staring at a future dictated by a family that will never truly accept her as one of their own. The story of the side door protocol is not just a tale of petty family squabbles. It is a masterclass in institutional warfare. It proves that the truly powerful do not need to scream leak to the press or throw tantrums to destroy an opponent. They simply use the architecture already in place. They weaponize the rules. They enforce the protocol. And they wait. Princess Anne did not just protect the gates of Buckingham Palace. She protected the fundamental integrity of the bloodline from being quietly occupied by a family that had no right to its privileges. She delivered a silent, perfectly executed checkmate. Camilla finally achieved the crown she spent her whole life chasing, only to realize that the doors of the castle are locked from the inside. If you found this forensic breakdown of royal power dynamics compelling, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an analysis of the hidden machinery driving the world's most secretive institutions.